The next thing we're going to do here is add the propagation modifier to our trunk. So I can go right here in the stack, right above our render settings, and I can just add a propagation modifier, which is right here in the toolbar. If I click on the propagation modifier, I'll just turn off show end result because we don't have any render settings quite yet. You can see that this is going to kind of generate strands all the way along your existing trunk strand, and that's going to work really great for us. So the first thing I want to do is set these propagate on and assign group IDs. So we want to propagate on ID 0, and that's pretty much everything, which is what our base trunk strand is. And we want to assign this a group ID of 1, because on our next stage we're just going to want to assign leaves to this particular group ID, which will be our branches. So for these branches, we're going to want to choose to have our branches in a particular order. One thing I like to do is just kind of get rid of all the randomization and then put it back in a little later. This way I can get a really good idea of what everything looks like without any variation. So I'm just going to zero out any of these randomizations. Now, the first thing I'm going to want to do is adjust how many I want. So I'm going to just half this to maybe 25 branches. And then I'm going to adjust the distribution range. So this is the low and high range along the strand of where these are going to get created. So I'm actually going to, you can see if I bring that high range down, it's going to kind of go down that way, or if I bring the low range up, it's going to go this way. And this is mostly where I want those branches. Okay? I need to have the branches, you know, not just on one side or the other. And that's where we can go in and adjust the twist control on the number of sides. So right now it's just asking to put these branches on 2 sides. We're going to up that quite a bit. So we'll just go in and say 3, 4, 5, 6 I think will be a-okay, and that gives me a nice distribution of these. Now it is, again, not super random, but it does give me a nice distribution overall. Now the next thing I'm going to do is adjust the length. And one thing I like to do is set this relative to the base strand, because that means if this one gets shorter, these will get shorter as well. And that leaves it in a procedural kind of setup, which I like. So I'll just set that to 1, or actually even a little bit less, maybe something like this. I might just bring down that high range a little so that they're not quite right at that tip. Now there's a couple other parameters here we can adjust. I'm going to go right below twist control, and we have our fanning. We have a global direction, up or down. So I'm going to kind of point these branches up, because usually they kind of grow up towards the sun like so, and that's going to kind of work well. Now we can go in and probably start adding some of that randomization. So on the length, maybe a little randomization wouldn't hurt. Okay, and then on that distribution or the twist, I can actually move that global twist around if I wanted to, or I can add a little randomization. So that's going to spread that out a little bit so it's not quite as uniform. And that's looking a lot better. Let me rename this to our branch prop. Let's add in that render settings again. So we're going to just go down here and add our render settings, and we'll rename this right away, branch render. And of course this only wants to apply to that propagation group. So we've said propagate on group 0, but assign a group ID of 1. So if we just want to control the look of, so right now, of course, if I turn on show end result, this is applying to group 0, which encompasses all groups. But if I just wanted to apply to group 1, then I can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to just adjust this down slightly. And I think the UI just hasn't quite updated here. Just refresh that on my render settings here slightly. There we go. Under our branch render, now I can adjust these to kind of look a little bit more like branches. I guess that's fine. You know, I might want to go in and maybe make it a little more tapered towards the base. And in our propagation settings, just like we did before with our guides from surface, we can actually go in and set the segment count. So I'm going to give this a few more segments. I think 9 or 10 will be fine. And that way I'll be able to get a little more fidelity out of how these are going to be tapered and things like that. So there's my branches. Now one thing I'm going to add in here is a modifier that I really like. It's a basic procedural modifier called gravity. This isn't a dynamic modifier. It's just going to kind of bend things based on gravity, and it has this nice little gravity curve that you can work with. I don't actually want it to be on strand 0, which is, as you can see, all strands. I just want it to be on strand 1. And this is a way that I can kind of adjust how much these might droop down and the way that they might. You can see that we're getting that nice S curve. If we just wanted it to be a little bit more of a traditional curve, we could do that. I do like a little bit of that S in there. So maybe I'll kind of bring that down like so. And there's my branches. Okay, so we've successfully made some branches and our tree trunk. And let me just go in and rename this. Branch bend. I'm going to turn off the edge faces because I think we have a good idea what's going on there now. And the next thing we're going to do is add our leaves and assign a material. This is going to be a pretty easy process because building with these group IDs allows us to assign a multi-sub-object material pretty easily, and that's what we'll look at next.